One of the really interesting things about scales is the form we use to express it can make a big difference in how well we understand it. Now, said a different way, we could think of it as some scales are meant for playing, or some forms of scales are meant for playing. Other scale forms are meant for learning. And this is a really important thing to consider, and it doesn't get a lot of conversation amongst guitar teachers. Let me give you an example. As a little kid, I'm learning guitar, got my first guitar teacher, first guitar, and I learned a scale. And it's a scale we all probably know and practice all the time. Right? Standard scale. What scale is that? And this really surprised me as a kid, and it baffled me for many years, because I heard the first note, that's an E. Well, that's an E scale to me. Well, it's not. That was the C major scale. So I ended up getting very confused on this idea, because what I was actually learning was the note sequence of the E-phrygian mode of the C major scale. Now, if you understand modes, you kind of go, yes, so what? But as a 10-year-old kid, this was pretty baffling. And the reality is, yes, those are all the notes that are in a C major scale, and the order, the sequence, starts with an E note, so it's the sequence beginning or describing the E-phrygian mode. So that's not a good scale for teaching and understanding. It's maybe a great scale for playing. What would have been a better scale to understand, especially for a 10-year-old kid? Well, maybe something more like starting with C, do 3 notes. That one might have made a lot more sense to me as a little kid. And so you can see the problems we run into. It's easy to disguise the information in something that has an odd shape or requires you to really understand how fourths and fifths wrap around in order to get the notes right. So this is the key we're going to use to unlock modes. And it's basically driven by something I saw as a little kid. The shape of the scale makes all the difference. So let's talk about the C major scale, also known as the C-Ionian mode. It's the notes of the C scale, C major scale. It's in the key of C, which is to say, if I write the key signature, there's no sharps and flats in it. So it's just our C note, or C scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You know, there is no sharps and flats involved at this point. All right. And if I want to really talk about modes, what I'm really talking about is where the half step, half intervals, or single fret steps occur. So let's look at a scale that makes that really clear. And it doesn't demand we know an awful lot. In fact, all it really demands we know is the C power chord, which is a C and a G note, because that lets us mark how we're going to wrap our scale around. So if I go C, D, E, F, I can come back to that G, A, B, C. What you were to notice there is that this is a somewhat symmetric scale, or both halves of the scale repeat each other in shape. I go C, D, E, F, so there's my half step. Come back to the G, A, B, C. We can see that little close together bit. They're right at the end of the 4-note arrangements. Now remember, there's only 7 notes in our major scale, but we love to repeat the octave. We like having that extra C note at the end that's 1 full octave up from our starting C. Very reasonable. Well, that's great. We've got the C-Ionian mode. Well, what happens if I start with a D note rather than our C note, but I obey the exact same rules? I'm going to play the notes of the C major scale, and I'm going to wrap them based on the note we start on and the power chord. So we're going to start on a D. The power chord takes us up here to an E. Did I say that right? Let's see. To an A note, sorry. So I've got a D and an A. And so we're going to wrap on the A note. So we go D, E, remember F, it's right nearby. Then we go to G. Then we're going to come to the A, the B, notice what happened. The little half steps, right? D, E, F, and the last set have moved to the middle of our scale. They're no longer at the ends. So we have changed the characteristic, the flavor of this particular scale. We're still using the notes of the C major scale. That hasn't changed. We started on D, and we changed where the half step sits. And it's symmetric in the sense that the top four and the bottom four notes have sequences have the same shape. That's the D Dorian mode. Now, D Dorian is one of my favorite modes to use, simply because it's not as sad as a minor scale. It has a little bit of flavor that's different than the major scale, and it's just a little bit unique, which is nice. But you might say to yourself, well, but wait, you've lost the C starting point. You've moved to D. Well, yeah, that's true. Why might that matter? Well, maybe you're not a great singer. Maybe you don't have the full range of just any set of notes. You might need to transpose that back down a little bit. So you're working in the rough territory of, say, C. Well, that's no problem. We can do that. We're just going to count back 2 steps, and we can play the same pattern starting with a C note. Make sure I got that right. And you can hear it sounds a little different. Well, that's what the idea of a mode is. It sounds a little different. Now, if we're versed in making a scale, a sequence of notes into chords, we'd remember that in our C major scale, we'd have a C as our first chord. Our fourth, because we always make a 1-4-5 song in simple music, our fourth chord is going to be an F, and then we're going to have a G. Okay, so those are our 3 chords. Well, what happens when we go to Dorian? Because we have to make our chords again with the notes that we're actually using. Well, when we do that, we end up with a C minor, the F stays the same, and we get a G minor. So you can hear that the chords too have changed, even if we've come back to the same relative region. So that's what we mean by a modal change. We've taken a different sequence of notes. It's given us a different pattern from the C scale. And if I was in D Dorian, I'm still in the C major scale, that's fine. When I shifted back to C with that same note pattern, what I really did was I moved to the B flat major scale. And I have a starting point of a C minor for that, and C minor is just not in our C major scale. So you can sort of see what's happening. We have some tricks we're putting in, and understanding this is predicated on choosing a good scale to let us visualize what's going on. And so let's just remind ourselves, when I have my C major scale, that's the sound we recognize, and when I've gone to our D Dorian pattern, but I shifted back, so I begin with the C, I'm now going to hear, and it does sound different. But that's all the excitement of modes. We've just made a change in our tonal center, if you like, and then from that tonal center change, we've mapped that back into whatever key or whatever starting point we want to use. So it's a lot simpler than we often think. A lot of it is just disguised by the choice that we make in terms of picking the scale shape that we want to work in to emphasize the changes that are showing up from these different patterns. Hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully it makes sense. I'm going to talk about this a little more. Dorian is probably my most favored of the modes, but I'm a little partial to Mixolydian because it's kind of like half happy and half kind of sad. So it gives you kind of an interest tonality. So Mixolydian is very, very interesting, and we'll probably talk about that next time.